Okay, that's a little bit better. That looks like a Skype call. That's fine. Let's. There we go. Hey, sorry about that. Thank you so much for joining us again. Um,
Uh, yeah, I'm happy to be here.
I'm really excited to have you. Uh, the um, the last time were on was fantastic. It was really great to have so much insight about the development of the game, so yeah, I'm excited to talk to you now to sort of wrap up Labyrinth of Lies, which I really enjoyed. I like that a lot. I feel like um, the it I feel like in some ways it felt like a more contained world than some of the other games, and I'm trying to remember Thornton Hall, which I guess was also not like huge. And this world is a little bit bigger when you take into account sort of the museum and the underworld and the stage area, but they felt like distinct spaces and you could navigate each one. I think it helped that the underworld was sort of such a linear space that I don't know. It didn't feel sprawling. At no point did I feel lost, and I didn't really feel like I missed areas except for that one time when I missed that one area. And then the game was really really good about like redirecting me and telling me I can't leave until I see everything. Is
Yeah,
that do you like from your end? Is that also true? Is my perception in any way accurate?
uh, yeah, it's really interesting to think about the environmental design for Lie because like you said, outside of the secret passage between the museum and the workshop,
Yeah.
they are pretty much connected linearly from beginning to end. You know, you've got the office goes into the museum, goes
Yeah.
into the outside, goes into the amphitheater, goes down into Styx, which goes into the underworld, which goes into Tartarus, which goes into the throne room, and most of the other games are not that linear in far of environmental design. A lot of the other games tend to have a kind of like a central hub environment and then different spokes going out of it that
Yeah.
might be 2 to 3 environments long, but and they also might interconnect to other spokes.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah. No, 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 absolutely. And this, if I think about the museum as being sort of a hub, there's only really like 2 or 3 ways out of that, and then they lead back into each other. So yeah, okay, that totally makes sense. I think that helps justify the feeling that I got. I feel like that helps me make sense of the scope of the game. And like Nancy Drew is an interesting, like I'm getting a handle on the pattern of what a Nancy Drew game is. There is an element of sort of spatial and conversational exploration, just going around and investigating in sort of a traditional sense, looking for clues, finding things, talking to people, getting all of the facts, piecing it all together. And then there are these sort of self-contained puzzles that either gate certain areas or give you access to important clues, or gate the narrative from progressing forward. And those self-contained puzzles are, because they are so self-contained, and in this game especially, we talked last time about how this game is really really I don't want to say strict, but it is very conscious of like making sure that you can solve a puzzle and are supposed to be solving that puzzle before you can attempt it. Like there's no fiddling around with a puzzle that then you can't or don't need to complete yet. And so those self-contained puzzles are very self-contained, and conceptually I can think about them as like just a space. So the thing that's sprawling, the thing that's more old school adventure game is the like walking around a world and exploring that space. And where on Mostly Walking, I feel like we see a lot of adventure games get into trouble is when that space is sprawling. It becomes really difficult to manage as a player. I feel like this, because it was so self-contained, I never felt like I was lost. I never felt lost.
Yeah, and that's one of the kind of difficult things on our end sometimes is to communicate what environment we're talking about and what the bounds of an environment are. Like when you got completely stuck because you had missed a single piece of paper in a side passageway, you know, it's your task list hint was explore Tartarus.
Right.
And to us, that's okay. Tartarus has a beginning at the stage doors. It has an end at the next set of stage doors. And that is what is called Tartarus. Right. Anything outside of that is called something else. You as a player don't necessarily know that unless you've been paying really close attention to when different explore tasks have popped up and where you are in the game when that happens.
Right.
Because each environment tends to have its own explore task. You know, you'll have a explore the River Styx, explore the underworld, explore Tartarus, explore the throne room. And the explore the throne room didn't pop up until the very, very end of the game when you actually could explore the throne room. And that's, if you're not really paying attention to that, having a task that says explore this area might not be as meaningful as we assume it is.
Right. No, I think it generally does. So did you happen to notice there must have been tasks that popped up for exploring the Styx area and the underworld area? I must have clicked those off at some point early without sort of like recognizing that they were distinct areas from, because I don't even remember the Styx name. I remember Underworld and Tartarus, and in my mind I associated those two. Like I understood Tartarus to be the sort of the ancient Greek term, the name for the underworld. So I didn't realize that they were describing two distinct areas. I just thought they were both sort of names for that whole underground area. And I guess I must have like checked off explore the underworld at some point without realizing that was a different task. That's what you're saying, right? Is that I did that?
Yeah, and there might not have been one for the Styx environment just because it was
there's not
such a small transitionary environment, and also the types of things that would be the criteria for exploring it weren't guaranteed to be there when you first found it, or even within your first few visits, because typically an explore the area means you've looked at a few particular key pieces. Those might be puzzles that you don't have access to yet, but you've seen them.
Sure.
And you've gotten a Nancy line about them. You've found whatever inventory items are available to be picked up, and if there's a character there, you have met that character and started a conversation with them. So Thanos is in Styx.
Right.
But he's not there when you first go down.
He doesn't show up for a while.
And depending on how you go through the game, he might not be there for a very long time. And so if there was an explore task for that, should talking to Thanos be part of that, even though it means you won't be able to check it off for a very long time? And that would mean not that you've missed something that's not there yet.
Right.
And also, like in the workshop, for instance, the wrench that you need to open up the blacklight isn't there at the very beginning when you first get into the workshop and are able to explore it. So it's not tied to the explore task. because you can't access it when you should feasibly be able to explore the workshop.
Right.
Which is also one of the kind of problematic things, is that if you're stuck on opening the blacklight and you know you need a wrench, okay, great. The idea is that you will go to the workshop because you might associate tools with the workshop, and that would be a logical place to check. But if you don't make that connection, then it can be a little difficult.
Yeah. No, and I feel like I had a little bit of that problem briefly. Gary, are you still sending video?
Let me check. As far as I can tell, I am.
It does seem like you are. It seems like it's just receiving as blank. Okay, well, let's keep going and see if it comes back. This is Skype being Skype. Yeah, so I did have a moment of feeling like I had explored the workshop and now I needed a wrench, and so not being certain that it would be there, because I felt like that had been completely explored. But it was also sort of the obvious place, I guess, for me to look. And so I feel like I got over that very quickly just by looking around again.
Yeah, and so inventory items like that are always an interesting thing to tackle, because do you want it to be there from the very beginning and then you pick it up and don't have a use for it until near the end of the game, and you don't know why you'll need one? Or is it better to have it only show up once you know you need it, but then it might show up in a place you've already explored and didn't see it there before? Or the other option is to have it exist there and you're able to see it there graphically, but you can't click on it because you don't know that you need it yet.
Right. Yeah. No. I absolutely, I see that dilemma, because I really don't want stuff cluttering up my inventory. Like, I really like the pacing of the inventory. I feel like that's a really strong element of this game, which is not always, like, it's not obvious, that I think a lot of design must have gone into making sure that there are very few inventory items that you hold on to for a long time. Most of the inventory items sort of you get and you use relatively quickly, and so you don't have like this large ever-growing inventory like you do in some other adventure games.
Yeah, there is a design pass slated specifically to inventory management and when can we take inventory items away from you. Mm-hmm. And so it'll be, one of the last things we do is our designer will go through and figure out the logic for, okay, this is the last point that you possibly need this inventory item for. There's nothing else after this point in the game that references it in any way. We're going to take it away from you now.
Right.
And so for the things that are actually like lock and key type things, it makes total sense that, hey, you use it and it disappears.
Right.
But for other things like written assets like books and pamphlets and such, those will just magically be taken out of your inventory when you no longer need them.
Right.
And most players don't actively notice that, except if we didn't do it at the end of the game, you would have,
it'd be terrible.
When you were solving the Godstaff puzzle, it was already a little bit too problematic to have to go between the ancient Greeks books and the scrap of paper with the letters on it.
Right.
And imagine if you actually had to scroll the inventory between those two items because you had 12 other things in there.
Right. No, absolutely. That'd be crazy. That would be a huge problem. Well, it would be a huge problem if I didn't see. Then at that point I would have to be taking physical notes, which is interesting, and you can definitely design like for that. And I think that there's a corpus of games that design for that. But it's very much contrary to sort of a modern sensibility that I feel like the Nancy Drew games do a really good job of sort of hewing to, where like I can take notes, and taking notes might occasionally help, but most of the time it's the game is really good about presenting me or giving me access to all of the information that I need to solve puzzles.
Yeah, and there's definitely been a kind of approach as the games have aged and as we've gotten into the more kind of modern era of the games to make the ideal goal being that you don't have to write anything down or document anything yourself. You can still,
Right.
obviously, and it might make it easier or a little faster, but the ideal being that if there's a piece of information that's important for you to know and to keep a record of, it is kept record of somewhere in the game, whether it's in
Right.
the task list or the notes portion of the task list or a written assets or something that you're actually instructed to take a picture of.
Right.
It's somewhere in the game. Like I remember in Shadow at the Water's Edge when you guys first started and you got stuck on trying to find your room, and looking through it, your room number was not written down for you anywhere. It wasn't in the notes that didn't exist like they do then. It wasn't on the inventory item. It was and so nowadays that's the perfect thing.
Yeah.
Like in your notes tab, it would just go in there as a line item. I'm staying in room 22.
Right.
And so little things like that, when I go back and look at some of the older games, are just aggravate me severely.
I mean, I can only imagine. I like that. That's got to be the downside to being able to do these incremental improvements on the sort of basic game structure and game engine. Is that when you go back and look at an older version, you just see things that that you feel like that should be fixed, that are like that you now have a mental model for a different way that they can work.
Yeah, and the latest games are obviously by no means perfect in that regard. The final left turn that you have to hunt for in the throne room, that's in between looking at the throne and looking at the big display that had the seeds on it. It's very easy to miss.
Yeah.
And and when it comes right down to it, the information you get through that left turn isn't all that special.
Right.
It's like that Grigor letter could have been put somewhere else, and
right.
If you did fully explore and you saw the van back there, great, but if you didn't, it's not the end of the world.
Right. Right.
And there's a section in The Silent Spy where there's a kind of similar left turn that's in between a turn 90 degrees left and a go forward hotspot, and when you were clicking around there, the pacing had kind of gotten to you, and it was kind of a tense situation. You were rushing, you wanted to get to the end, and it's natural to go to kind of the extremes. You're either on the left side of the screen, or you're on the right side of the screen, or you're in the exact middle.
Right.
And so when you have a hotspot that's not in one of those three places, it's very easy to miss, especially when the tension has built up and the player feels like they should be rushing.
Yeah, no, that is definitely a like move moment, and it's interesting how distinct that is, and I'm thinking about it now, like in other games that I like. Okay, so I recently just played the most recent Tomb Raider game, Rise of the Tomb Raider. And I feel like that's obviously a very different style of game than Nancy Drew, but it plays with the same dichotomy of for a lot of the game you are in an investigative mode, and in Tomb Raider it's a lot about like trying to figure out how you can move through space, and in Nancy Drew it's a lot about sort of looking for the clues that will help you solve the mystery. But in both of those it's a very like careful, considered, spending time looking around, making note of your environment. The sort of subtlety of a 45-degree angle out of a scene wouldn't seem like too unusual or too hard to find during that mode. But then there are definitely modes in both of these games where it's much more action-packed. The tension is ramped up. And in Tomb Raider, they make them into these sort of cinematic moments where you are running across like collapsing architecture, and there's lots of like quick time events and things like that in order to preserve a sense of momentum and speed. And I feel like Nancy Drew, for the most part, also does that. Like I feel like I can move through that space very, very quickly once I've gotten a sense of where things are and I'm trying to get to sort of the next area. In this game, it worked really well for me to say, like, I got out of this cage, I'm going to like try to get out of the underground set area, just like zoom straight through that. But I'm not looking at detail at that point. And so like that kind of detail, I'm going to tend to miss. It's really interesting to think about it that way.
Right. And that's, again, one of the interesting things about this game in particular is you have the juxtaposition of the pacing of it's go, go, go. I'm near the end. I can tell I'm near the end.
Yeah.
I want to finish.
Yeah.
And also, hey, you've just unlocked a new environment you've never seen before. And so normally when you first get into an environment you've never seen before, most of the people do take their time to look around, fully explore it,
totally,
hunt for hotspots they might have missed. And so having that circumstance come up, one, you're in the kind of climactic race to the finish is awkward.
Yeah. That's a great point. That's really interesting. That's good. And that's like super actionable too. I mean, like you can think from a design standpoint, you can really think about introducing a new space. Like that's tempting because a lot of the time I think at a climax of a story, that climax involving unlocking a new space, that makes a lot of sense. That's really... like we're used to thinking about stories that way. But you got to be careful in interactive media. In a game, unlocking a new space is not just like a new visual environment for your protagonist to move through. It's a whole, like it involves a whole way of thinking for the player that we don't necessarily account for, but we kind of need to. Interesting. Harrison, you just flashed. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay, great. Good. Okay, I just want to make sure. All right, so there were some questions. I don't know if this is specifically for you or me or just a rhetorical question, but do you think Nancy Drew just doesn't have a sense of, or a self-preservation instinct? She's in numerous clearly dangerous situations. She doesn't even get paid for it. Which, I mean, I actually think there's something really significant to this. That's kind of a flippant statement, but like Nancy Drew is such an interesting, heroic character because she is driven by this sense of justice and this sense of truth that is related to her job, but it's not like she doesn't do it because it's her job. She does it because she can't not get to the bottom of a mystery. On the other hand, she puts herself in like significant danger doing it.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting thought, and I think when it comes to the games especially, it's kind of hard to appreciate because the games are designed such that there is no permanent consequence. When you actually do get yourself killed or something to that effect, you get to try again.
Yeah, it's very forgiving in a mechanical way.
It's very forgiving.
Way. Yeah.
Yeah, and so, it's in that sense, when it comes to the games, I think it's a lot harder to appreciate that she's doing things despite the danger because she is driven for that sense of justice and solving the case and whatnot. Because in the games, any danger that there actually is oh, that's a kind of funny second chance, I won't do that again.
Right. It's, although, I mean, narratively, it's serious consequences, and in the moment, I mean, I definitely felt at that, like, there's an amazing scene at the end of this game where Thanos is like walking towards you slowly across the room.
Yeah.
That was a fantastic moment, and it freaked me out. Like, I definitely felt that sort of danger and anxiety and sort of like it felt bad to die at that point. But mechanically, it's super forgiving. Like, I knew that it wasn't going to be that there wouldn't be real consequences for me as a player.
Yeah, and that particular example is also an interesting point because that's a case where, because it is a somewhat Twitch skill situation, I mean, it's not extremely fast-paced or anything, but
right.
You are on a real timer that's in the matter of seconds and not minutes.
Right.
That's a case where, the hotspot to click on the keypad is actually full screen. Like, you can't miss in that particular case.
Yes. Yeah.
And similarly, like when you're exploring Tartarus for the first time and you first go up the ramp and the boulder rolls down at you, the backup hotspot is full screen in that
Is that
case,
right?
when it's normally just the bottom 100 pixels.
Oh my god, I love that so much. Because that moment felt badass to me. Like, I felt like I had cat-like reflexes to dodge out of the way of that boulder, and I'm sure that like it is only because it was a full screen hotspot. I love that. I love that so much.
Yeah, and that's because Twitch-based skill and reaction time isn't a mechanic in our games. It's not something that you're meant to possess in order to be able to play them.
Right. You don't want to stress that.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. I think that's cool. That's neat. That's super neat. Okay, I had a couple questions for you, but let's go back to this list. Looking back on this game, are there changes that you would make in, I guess, specifically what you did, and then in general, are there things that you wish you could change about this game in retrospect?
Specifically as to the things I personally did, not really, just because, I mean, my main job was to take other people's work and stitch it together into a playable product.
Sure.
I wasn't doing the design work or design decisions. I wasn't making the choices as to what went in the game or what didn't go in. In terms of things that I acknowledge as being kind of problems but don't really know a way to fix them is, for instance, finding the note that you missed that is the keystone to opening up the final chapter of the game to solve the workshop alarm. Because it is in a missable spot, but then also during beta testing, it never came up as a problem. But that's also kind of a self-selecting thing, because our beta testers are people who are familiar with Nancy Drew games.
Right.
And missing that final left turn out of the throne room. Like, if I could make any design changes, it would probably be to either remove that entirely and take that letter from Grigor and put it somewhere else that it makes sense, or to redo the art such that it was a lot more obvious that there was a catwalk back into another area behind the set there.
It feels like that art was really halfway there. There was very much like a standout element on the ground at that place, like right around there. But it didn't do enough, for me at least, to like lead me around a corner to make it clear that there was actually a pathway. Yeah. And that does seem like something it could, that the way that sort of area was designed, that visually could have indicated that a little bit better.
Yeah, and that's one of the places where the 6-month dev cycle can kind of hurt us a bit, is when it comes down to, oh, hey, we identified this problem, and really the best way to fix it is on the art side. It's like, oh, well, sorry, we don't have time to redesign and retexture and re-render that environment.
Right.
It's the way it is at this point.
Yep. Yep. No, absolutely. Well, you got to make those kinds of compromises too.
Yeah.
Yep. Interesting. Are there, so this is Cage Tiger asks if there are any things that you would have done differently if you had known Sea of Darkness was the last Nancy Drew game that you were going to work on.
I don't really think so, at least not when it came to making the game specifically. I mean, there might have been things I would have done differently in terms of being at the office and, spending more time with the team and associating more with people. But when it comes to like my day-to-day job responsibilities and how much control I had over those, I don't think there'd be anything that I really would have done differently. Because as far as I'm concerned, I put in the work to make the best game every single game I work on. And so there certainly wouldn't have been any sense of, well, this is the final hurrah, let's make sure it's good, because we want all of the games to live up to that.
Right. No, absolutely. Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. Okay, can I ask you a couple of like spoilers questions?
Sure.
Is there a way to get behind the other door in the underworld?
No, that door will never open.
That door never opens. Okay.
There is a meta award called Knock Knock Knocking on Heaven's Door for clicking on it enough times. And
okay.
I can't remember what the criteria of it is. It's something obscene, like 77 or something.
Holy shit! Okay.
It's probably not that high, but it's not something that you would get.
No, totally. Because I did it like 3 or 4 times. Right? Yeah. Okay.
That door will never open.
Interesting.
There's nothing behind it. There's no graphical renderings of it open. So.
Yeah. Okay. That's super interesting. I wonder if, Because to me, that was definitely a thing that I took away at the end of the game, particularly when I sort of realized, and I'd probably seen this before, I assume this was in some of the other games, I just didn't remember the meta awards, but when I saw that there were, like, Easter egg type things, there were, like, things that I could do that weren't strictly required for the game, I felt like there must have been something behind that door. Like, that was the feeling that it left for me as a player. I wonder if that's common, or if people tended to sort of dismiss it.
Yeah, I don't know. And as far as I know, we didn't have any sort of metrics gathering or anything for which meta awards were achieved and what percentage of players got them. Because it's certainly an intriguing door that you want to open, and
right.
In the vast majority of cases in Nancy Drew, if there's something that's not ever going to open, you can't click on it at all. There's
right.
no
Yes.
interactivity.
Yes, the fact that I could actually try to open it, I didn't think about that, but that's so, like, now that you say that, I do see that pattern in these games. Like, that is really surprising. Huh. Why do you think that choice was made, to make that an interactable object?
It's possible that it was just hey, that might make a really good, easy meta award to do that's kind of
right.
humorous. And, every single one of the games has kind of a set amount of meta awards to make the artwork at the end for how many trophies there are.
Sure.
Otherwise, that's a Kathy question as to whether it was worth deviating from convention strictly for a meta award, and the risk of potentially frustrating players that it won't ever open, but you can still click on it.
My experience of it, just obviously very subjective, but my experience of it was not as a frustrating element. It was very, it was super intriguing, and it was something that sort of pulled me along for the whole game, that I thought, at some point, I'm going to get to open this door. And when I finished the game, it sort of left this lingering question of, could I have ever opened it? What was there? What could have been there? But I was never frustrated by it. So maybe that's, I don't know, maybe just the way that it was deployed, it absolutely felt like something that would eventually come into play, and then by the time I got to the end of the game, maybe this is it. Like, the puzzles were lined up very neatly for me at the end of the game, and so there was not a lot of wandering around looking for what's next, where I would feel like, am I supposed to be opening this door? Like, this has got to be the next thing. I never had that experience. I was able to sort of just move through that end section very smoothly. I feel like I could have easily forgotten about that door, honestly, because it didn't come back into play.
And I think that's kind of the intention. Like, there's a little bit of an interesting thought behind, well, you can go through the door to hell whenever you want, but the door to heaven has nothing behind it, and you can't ever open it. But yeah, it's
interesting.
I have really kind of mixed feelings on the whole, the way these games end, and that the puzzles are just lined up one after the other, bam, 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 bam. Because they're at the very end, you go through a sequence of like 5 puzzles in a row with very little in between them, and that's kind of how most of the Nancy Drew games end up ending, is you have a sequence of puzzles back to back. And that's on the one hand, it's good to have that direction to players that you're kind of being railroaded towards the end of the game,
Yeah.
and we don't really want you going off and exploring at this point. Uh, but it's finding that balance of how many puzzles is too many and are they too hard is an interesting question to ponder.
No, finding a balance, I think you're absolutely right. That is really important because, I mean, I will bring this back to what you were saying earlier, that at a certain point towards the end of the game, there is a sense of climax and there's a sense of tension and momentum towards the end. And I don't, as a player, I don't want to be like wandering around and exploring at that point. Like it seems part of the natural flow of the game for me to be moving more quickly through things at the end. That's my sense, at least. I think that it definitely plays into sort of an overall pacing of the game. Okay, I think that's all of my questions, all the questions that I had. What did we? I think that the last time we talked, you said that I apologize. I'm blanking on the name of the next game. Do you have a favorite Nancy Drew game? Is it the last one?
Favorite is kind of a hard thing to categorize for me. The Sea of Darkness is, I think,
Sea of Darkness,
the best game of all the ones that I've worked on. As overall, I think it's the best experience.
Mm-hmm.
The Shattered Medallion is, I think, a very fun game.
Okay.
It's kind of very light on the mystery, and so a lot of the core player base didn't receive it very well.
Interesting.
Because mystery, for most people, mystery and Nancy Drew go kind of hand in hand.
Yeah.
And but in terms of just no nonsense fun, it's one of my favorites, and it includes a couple repeats of what had been kind of capstone puzzles in previous games that are in there as side activities, and including basically a card-driven board game that's a lot of fun to play, just to spend time on.
That are sort of explicitly throwbacks to previous games?
Yeah, and so that's kind of one of the interesting things in Nancy Drew is that there exists what's called the bonus edition, and you get that if you pre-order. And in the bonus edition of the game, there's a couple extra things. Once there are bone charms scattered around for you to collect, like there were in Shadow at the Water's Edge. And the other thing, though, is that you have cell phone games on your cell phone, and those are previous puzzles that have been brought back, possibly updated or reskinned, or had level generation added or something. And some of those phone mini games can be a lot of fun to just spend time with. Unfortunately, it's the bonus edition only exists if you pre-order. So
right, yeah. So that it's hard to get in retrospect.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Those are cool little bonuses. Okay, I do have one more question because I've only played. So now I've played 3 of these games, but I've played them a little bit disjointed. I mean, they're all. Well, I don't know. There are big gaps in between the ones that I've played. Is there much of a sense of serialization to the Nancy Drew series? Like, if I play more of them and I play them in order, do I get any kind of a sense of like a larger story that's going on in Nancy's life that sort of spans from game to game? Or are they pretty self-contained in terms of... I mean, like in this game, I interacted with the Hardy Boys in a way that I hadn't in any of the previous games. In Thornton Hall, I interacted with Ned in a way that I didn't in Shadow's Edge. But I didn't really get a sense of if those were just fairly static characters, fairly static relationships that, you know, I came in and out of the games, or if there was any sense of evolution to them.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think as you play more of the games, you can get a better appreciation for who these, especially the phone friends, actually are. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times, phone friends can be throwbacks to previous characters from other games, and it just so happened that Ghost of Thornton Hall, you know, featured Savannah, who also was featured in Shadow at the Water's Edge.
Right.
And so you actually got that reference. If you didn't know that reference, if you didn't have that experience of having played Shadow at the Water's Edge, it wouldn't matter, really. You can still appreciate Ghost of Thornton Hall and still play through it and still have fun. So, I mean, in that sense, there's certain little references and things you might miss if you haven't played previous ones, or at least aren't familiar with who the characters are. But I don't think there's really a feel of like a overarching continuity storyline like you sometimes get in, you know, TV shows where each episode is mostly self-contained, but there is an overarching plot woven through all of them. It's interesting because Sea of Darkness actually has Nancy and Ned's relationship plays a bit more front stage than it has in previous games.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's Sea of Darkness it does a lot of things really well, and it's also was our first game with a new writer for quite a while, and she came in and did a smash out job with it. So
cool. Well, okay, I look forward to playing that. So here I'm going to ask you just a hypothetical follow-up to that question, which it sounds like, I mean, obviously this doesn't have an answer, but if the series continued, like, could you imagine Thanos ever coming back and playing a role in a later game? Or is that something that would be sort of outside the scope of how Nancy Drew stories are told?
I wouldn't rule it out.
Okay.
I mean, I maybe not coming back and like featuring fully as another character so much as having there be like a random newspaper with an article talking about him or something like that. Having a reference to him, I think would be quite likely somewhere in another game. But yeah, that's if the series continued the way it's been going, which right now it's not. So
right. Okay, fantastic. Well, I mean, again, thank you so much for sharing your time and for answering these kinds of questions. This is really fascinating for me, and I know that there are a lot of questions in the chat. I really appreciate you being hanging out during this whole series of Labyrinth of Lies streams and being so open to answering questions in the chat.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a blast being here and interacting with chat also, and it's always really nice to see how much people appreciate a game that you've worked on, especially if it's not a mainstream AAA product that will have thousands of reviews within a few days of the embargo lifting. Right.
No, absolutely. Nancy Drew has, I think, fit a very special place in how consistent it was creating new games for fans of that series, and how loyal fans were. I know several people that, now that I've played some of these games publicly, have talked to me about how big a part they played in their own a lot of the times in their childhood and like growing up, in their development, and for some of them in their desire to then go into the games industry. Nancy Drew has been a big influence, I think, on a lot of people.
Well, yeah, and the first game came out, Christmas of 1998, and and it's been kind of fascinating to watch, because now we're at the point where you have girls that grew up playing the game potentially sharing it with their own daughters. It's spanned a long enough time.
That's a great point.
Where that's feasible.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. That's really neat. Very, very, very cool. Well, again, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure having you on the show and being able to chat with you about this. And I look forward to the next time I get to play a Nancy Drew game, and I hope that we get to talk about it when it happens.
Yeah, I'd be really curious to see you go back and play one of the older games now that you've played one of the newer
I'm nervous about it. I also want to do that, but I definitely feel like even the little bit that I've experienced, I can see how there are some really smart decisions that got made over the evolution of the games, and I'm nervous about going back to sort of an older version that doesn't have that. But I would love to do it. I will definitely do that.
Well, yeah, and so there's kind of two steps to that you could approach if you want to, and that's Tomb of the Lost Queen has the overall new UI and the higher resolution, but it's missing a couple key upgrades that have been done since then, like the inventory use hotspot and like the hints being integrated into the task list. Those things aren't in Tomb of the Lost Queen.
Right.
But otherwise, it has the UI overhaul in place. And then if you go previous to that, like Alibi and Ashes or anything before that, you have the older UI.
Yeah.
Which, going from the old one to the new one, especially if you have a huge gap in when you've played them, isn't necessarily a huge thing, because in my opinion, the new UI feels kind of like you would expect it to. It's fairly intuitive. It looks like a game UI. Going back to the old one, having experienced the new one, is hard.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. I bet that would be fun, though. Cool. Well, that's a great suggestion. I will definitely do that. Okay, fantastic. So, my plan is to close this out with just a regular Q&A if there are any other questions. But I'm going to let you go now, Harrison. Thank you so much for doing this, and I can't wait until the next time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Had a great time myself, too.
Fantastic. All right, well, thanks. And there may or may not be other questions. I don't know. Let's I feel like there was something that I wanted to talk about. You know what? Maybe there wasn't. Maybe actually we're good. There were a couple of things that I wanted to say. One is that next week, now that we're done with Labyrinth of Lies, okay, we're going to come back to this. Now that we're done with Labyrinth of Lies, the next week I'm going to play a new game. It's an indie game that was just released. It's called Jetamero. I have to look at it because that name doesn't stick in my mind. But Jenna Marrow has a really cool aesthetic, visual aesthetic. Look it up. We'll be playing it next week. I'm really excited about it. I think it looks awesome. We're going to be joined by the developer Gabriel Koenig, who I'm really excited to talk to about it. This game just launched last week. And yeah, I think it looks really neat. So we're going to do that. We might do a couple little indie games. We might do and then move on to something bigger, I think is going to be the plan. And if you came into the chat late, I'm going to paste this link one more time in here for the poll seeking opinions about overlay, chat overlay on VODs, and whether we should do that at all or do it a little bit, or what we want to do with that. So last question from Gary. How would the game be best improved by the addition of a dragon? So I was thinking about this because obviously this is our community question. I was thinking about this when we were talking about the episodic nature of the game. Because I gotta say, it strikes me as significant that the target audience for the Nancy Drew franchise is not just women. It is specific, or adventure gamers. It is specifically primarily people who have played other games in the Nancy Drew franchise. That there seems to be a strong bias in the design and frankly in the marketing and the entire structure, viewing the franchise, up through Sea of Darkness at least. It seemed to revolve pretty heavily around retention, more than bringing in new players. And no doubt new players came into the series all the time, and that is an important metric. But it seems like the game is very targeted at like the Nancy Drew fan base, and almost everybody that I've talked to in the wake of playing these games who identifies as a Nancy Drew player, as somebody who has played Nancy Drew games, has played like all of them. I haven't talked to a lot of people who are like, yeah, I played one and it was neat. It's like, yes, I played that entire series, all 30 games. So it seems like there is a huge opportunity to have serial elements, and I think that some of that is probably difficult, and some of what I think are the most interesting parts of it would be, and I think there would actually be a huge opportunity in playing around with Nancy's relationships, because I think the online community that would be interested in Nancy Drew games would also be interested in speculating on Nancy Drew's relationship status. But I can also see there would be a lot of people who, I don't want to say Nancy Drew purists, but Nancy Drew has been, as a character, has been around for a long time. And she has established relationships. And so I think there's only so much that you can do there without treading on what people see as sort of sacred text. You would want to be careful with that. What I think you could totally do is ancillary characters who are not, from the original Nancy Drew books, who aren't established canon relationships for her, bringing them in and having them be recurring and having Nancy's relationship with them evolve, and not bringing in sort of romantic partners. But Savannah, I think, is an interesting start, and I didn't get a huge sense of how much. Well, no, maybe I can't speak to that. I don't remember whether she as a character really evolved from one game to the next. If she seemed different, or Nancy's take on her seemed different. Where you could get a lot of drama is creating a Moriarty for Nancy Drew, who doesn't really have one, and that isn't sort of the structure of the traditional Nancy Drew story. So to do that, you'd have to deviate from what Nancy Drew historically is. But I think it's not a deviation that is too far, and it plays into patterns and tropes that are very familiar, and I think it plays to the strengths of modern media that people have expectations around, and that have proven out to be really, there are good practices around introducing serial villains, recurring villains, especially, and having storylines that connect together, that are not, I wouldn't want to take it necessarily to the extent where things become inaccessible in any way. But honestly, there's a lot about the background narrative of Nancy Drew games that is already, I'm going to use the word glossy. There's stuff that happened in this game around Melina, and the way that the heist sort of was set up and went down, and even the relationships between the sort of 4 actor villain characters, that I didn't feel super involved in. I knew those characters, and I cared about who was the bad guy and who was maybe had more of a heart of gold, but I felt like a lot of that was given to me. It wasn't necessarily and honestly, a lot of the background stuff about how the stage was developed and the technology that it was using, there's a lot of information that I just sort of take on faith. I read this, and some of it is going to be useful for solving puzzles, and it's gonna, I assume that it's all gonna sort of fit together in the solution of the mystery. But you could have things there that if you know that, for example, Thanos, who is part of the established crime international crime ring that is already a part of Nancy Drew canon, that he's got a personal grudge, or he has characteristics that are persistent, or he has a history with Nancy, and that is somehow meaningful. If that came into a story down the road, as somebody who saw the origin of that relationship, that would mean an enormous amount to me. And I feel like you could write it in a way that if I hadn't played Labyrinth of Lies, I would be able to follow what was going on. but it would also be obvious to me that there was something that I had missed, and that I could go back and play a previous game and see the origin of this, or I could just keep going forward and sort of go from where I am. I think there's an enormous amount of prior art. I mean, I can't tell you how many serial TV shows I've watched where I felt like there was no way you could jump in the middle, and then I went back and like rewatched the series and recognized how they had actually parceled out information and where they had put episode breaks, and the way that it was designed very, very cleverly, so that actually, yes, you could jump in at all sorts of different points. I think that like we have culturally some knowledge around how to do that, to create a story that is accessible to new viewers, but is really powerful to people who are following the franchise. For me, and I'm seeing that like this is not completely foreign, but to me, the introduction of a dragon to the Nancy Drew series that I really want is a dragon-sized villain, is somebody that is that transcends a single mystery, that is bigger than a single game, that casts a shadow over Nancy Drew as a character, and over the sort of the series of games that has been established. Somebody who at various points can be either like a shadowy figure behind the scenes, high up on a mountain manipulating events, or who needs to be eventually confronted, and because of that kind of build-up over multiple games, over multiple individual episodes of story, can then sort of authentically become so much larger than life. And frankly, playing this game, Thanos seems like that character. And the fact that he gets away at the end of it seems like he is such a poetic, already sort of larger than life character without a sense of resolution at the end. I mean, for me, putting a dragon in the game, it would be a dragon kingpin, who is continually behind the sort of situations that Nancy finds herself in, because ultimately he is maybe not obsessed with her, but has a personal vendetta against her, because of how she has foiled him in the past. I think that's where I would go with a Nancy Drew dragon. Cool. Awesome. That's going to be it for me for tonight. Thank you so much, everybody. This was a blast. I have had a hard week, and so it is nice for me to get to do this and play and finish a game like Nancy Drew that I really enjoyed, and get to chat with Harrison, and get to hang out with all of you. I really appreciate it. If you enjoy the play-by-play community, check out our Discord, check out our Steam page, check out our forum, check out my Twitter. Lots of places where members of the community get together and hang out. And a big special thank you to everybody who has subscribed to this channel. Really, really appreciate it. It helps us keep the lights on, keep things going, and keep things coming in the future. arranging to have devs and things come onto the show. If you're watching this on YouTube, then I would appreciate it if you register your like or dislike of the video, and leave us a comment. Let us know what you think about Nancy Drew and Play by Play. That's my whole spiel. That's all of it. I hope you guys are having a great night. I hope you have a good weekend. I will see you on Monday for Mostly Walking, when we will probably actually play a video game. We'll see. Who knows? And next week for something different, for Jetamero. It looks cool. Look it up. And I'll see you next week. All right. Have a great night.